He was born in a suburb of Chicago, in a community that Frank Lloyd Wright once described as a wonderful place, full of many churches for many good people. His father was a well-educated physician, his mother an accomplished musician. And they exposed their young son, Ernest, to numerous experiences, encouraged him to participate in any and everything that would broaden his perspective of life and bring him joy, fulfillment, and happiness. So in high school, he played football, he boxed, he ran track, played water polo, and he excelled in the classroom in English. When World War I broke out, Hemingway responded to a Red Cross recruitment effort, and with an adventuresome spirit and a bold personality, he was sent to Italy, became an ambulance driver, sent to the front. One day, he was severely wounded by mortar fire, and even though he was in severe pain with shrapnel all in both legs, he saved the life of a wounded soldier and carried him to safety. For that heroic act, he was awarded the Medal of Bravery. Not yet 20 years old, he came back to the States and tried to find what he was good at, which was writing. He started writing and ultimately won both a Pulitzer and Nobel Prize. He was that good. When the Second World War broke out, he became a war correspondent. And again, with an adventuresome spirit, traveled the world. Won another medal for bravery. Isn't that interesting? One in World War I and in World War II. He spent considerable time in places like Spain, in Paris, in Africa, in China. Later lived in Key West and in Cuba. In each of those places, he jumped into trying to find fulfillment in life with both feet. In Spain, he became a bullfighting enthusiast. In Africa, he became a big game hunter. In the Keys and in Cuba, he became a deep sea fisherman. He had fame. He experienced more bucket list adventures than any of us combined could put our bucket list together and experience. And yet, he couldn't find it. He turned to relationships. And when it didn't work out, he would turn to another. Ultimately, married 4 times. He was a heavy drinker, trying to fill the huge hole that was in his heart. And for a period of time, it would numb it. But when he would sober up, he'd still had his issues and problems, didn't he? In 1961, extremely lonely and in bed for days, mentally tormented, spiraling downward, worried about his finances, worried about his health, worried about his manuscripts that were in a vault in Cuba that he couldn't get out and do something with. On July the 2nd, 1961, Hemingway decided to end it all. He tragically took his life, even though he had guzzled down all that this world has to offer, looking for peace, contentment, joy, and fulfillment. But in the end, he never found it. And it wasn't enough. Well, we made a search. But he didn't look in the right place. I wonder how many there are throughout the world today. I wonder how many there are here in this assembly who either have been or are in his shoes. The author of the book, Is There All There Is to Life? Is This All There Is to Life? Believes we're all there. He says, whether we know it or not, all of us are engaged in a quest for something that will meet the need of our heart. We're all looking for the secret to finding delight anytime, anywhere, and under any circumstance. That's why the book that our monthly Bible reading has brought us to today is as relevant today as it was when the Hemingway of his day wrote it. Somewhere around 1,000 years before Jesus came to this earth and modeled before us what a life looks like that's found it. So let's open our Bibles together this morning to the book of Ecclesiastes. One writer calls it the mystery book of the Old Testament because it's often quoted by atheists and religious skeptics who talk about the 27 times that Solomon uses the phrase under the sun. Skeptics will point to the fact that there is no God because of this point. If someone with the religious heritage as Solomon, if someone as wise as this man could say 37 times that everything is vanity, it's meaningless, this life under the sun is meaningless, then their conclusion is twofold. One, there must not be a God, and two, that's why you grab all the gusto you can around here on this side under the sun. But I want you to know that they miss it. Because the key phrase is, it is meaningless under the sun. If life is devoid of the one who created the sun. The word Ecclesiastes means one who gathers and collects and examines information and addresses an assembly. Even though it's a long, big Hebrew word, the English translation comes from the Greek word ekklesia, which means what? The called out assembly. Or in our language today, it means the church. Isn't that fascinating? Verse 1 tells us that these are the words of the teacher. One translation says the words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Solomon has been on a search to find what's really important in life and what will fill him up. And now he's a teacher and a preacher. He's sharing all the information and all the experiences that he has observed about all the philosophies that people have tried to live by, trying to fill their tank up, their life up. And he's going to share it now with the people in the assembly, the people that he loves in his kingdom, the people that he loves the most and cares about the most, because he does not want them to experience the heartaches and the heartbreaks that come from pride and stubbornness in living a self-centered life focused upon ourselves. To put it in everyday language, Here's the question that Solomon's trying to find the answer to. Is there anything in this world that if I find it will fill me up and fill my every longing and continue to minister to me every single moment of every day, regardless of what's going on around me, regardless of what's going on in my family, regardless of what's going on in the world, regardless of how everything's falling apart, and on this side of the cross, regardless of what's going on any one local church, is there anything, if I find it, that I can say, I don't need to go any further or look any further. This is it. This is it right here. This is it. This will do it. This is the secret to fulfillment, peace, joy, contentment, and happiness. That's his quest and his search. So it's fascinating that Solomon begins his search to find the answer to that question with this thesis in verse 2, which is what? It's all meaningless. The teacher says, utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. Isn't that a sad and depressing way to begin a sermon to the assembly? Most scholars believe that he spoke and wrote these words toward the end of his life as he is looking back and reflecting on his life. Do you remember what we previously said about Solomon? He became the richest man who ever lived, had anything that his heart desired. He had a palace that everything in it was overlaid with gold. He was surrounded by people. That includes family, servants at his beckoning call, and a harem. He had anything that he wanted. If he wanted something, he just snapped his fingers and somebody made it happen. Not only did he have those things, but he had a mind-boggling fortune. And he was famous. And yet here he is as an older man, looking back on his life. And what's his summary about his life? One translation says it's vanity. It's been meaningless. It's been without real substance. It's not been significant. You mean to tell me, Solomon, that all of the pursuits that you've had, all the enjoyments that you've had in life are not really, truly significant? Listen closely. They don't fill his every longing if they're devoid of God. He's trying to find this search for peace and joy, devoid from God. He's trying to do what he's doing on his own, without God's approval, support, and blessings. And it's dawned on him now at this stage of life that all of that pursuit, devoid of God, and my relationship and walk with God is meaningless. Why doesn't any of those things and those experiences mean much to him anymore? It's because of this. He's come to the age in his life where he's having to come to grips with his own mortality. If you are my age or older, let me ask you, is that beginning to happen to you? I'm just looking to see. That we're coming to grips with our own mortality. If you are younger than I am, you can mark it down. It's going to happen to you one day. It's finally dawned on Solomon that all the things that he has and everybody that he's tried to pursue and every experience that he's had to try to fill him up hasn't really filled him up. Oh, he's had some good times. But they haven't really filled him up and sustained him. Why? There are two reasons. Here's the first one. The vast majority of his life has been spent all about him. Take any issue, any problem that you've ever encountered or had, if you could peel back the layers of the onion and get down to the bottom line, the real root cause of every problem is either pride or selfishness or both. That's just the bottom line. And secondly, anything that he or we pursues that's not healthy and wholesome and doesn't lift us up and have any redemptive value to it and is devoid of God is without real significance. And it can play right into the hands of the evil one. That would include books, that would include music, that would include movies, that would include TV shows, that would include experiences. None of them wrong in and of themselves, but they certainly can be used by the evil one. What's the point of this book? Make sure you get it, because it's the point of this lesson. Living our life the way that we want to. Pridefully and selfishly apart from God, or putting God even in some place other than His rightful place, is vanity. And it will lead to a long and fruitless search where we will never be fulfilled. Look closely in your Bibles. Between verses 2 and 3 in the text, there's a break. What Solomon is going to do now to support his thesis that everything devoid of God is really without lasting significance, if it's done for yourself and devoid of God, he's going to now talk about that and explain it. So beginning in verse 3 and going through the end of the chapter, he makes the observation from both history and nature that humanity is transient, that people come and go, and they come and go in the world, and they come and go in our life, and they come and go in congregations, and they live and die. And even though nature is permanent, regardless of where you live in this vast world, whether it's in Antigua or Tanzania or Zimbabwe or Australia or Estonia or Germany or Florence, Alabama, regardless of where you're going to live, Solomon said the sun's going to rise, the sun's going to set, and the wind's going to blow wherever it wants to, and the rivers are going to flow, and they ultimately are all going to flow to the sea. And his point is this: I don't care where you live, it's the same old, same old, same old every day. If you're trying to live for yourself and live life devoid of God. And so he says, there's nothing really new. Whatever you're chasing, whatever you're trying to learn, whatever you're trying to fill your life up with is just chasing after the wind. Do one thing this week that I've done this week. Go through this book and underline the many times he said it's chasing after the wind, and ask yourself, can you ever catch it? Can you ever catch the wind? In chapter 2, Solomon talks about the years that he spent pursuing pleasure through these huge blowout parties filled with laughter and wine and women and people and conversation. The book of 1 Kings goes into great detail about those parties, where he not only would throw a party, but he would foot the bill for 10 to 20,000 people a night. Did you get that? Can you imagine? He's living at this point in his life by the philosophy of the Jackson Fives. Enjoy yourself, enjoy yourself, enjoy yourself with me. Didn't mean to bat my foot up there like that. I mean, that's just the way it is. And one writer entitled chapter 2, Life in the Fast Lane. And if you're my generation or older, do you remember that Eagles song? Maybe. He was a hard-headed man and brutally handsome. She was terminally pretty. And what is the deal? What's the song? They tried everything, didn't they? They knew all the right people, took all the right pills. They threw outrageous parties, but what happened? They're slowly losing their mind, and they crash and burn, don't they? They do, because that's what happens when you live life in the fast lane. And that's the way Solomon's living it here. It might be fun. for the moment. But what's the story? The greatest short story ever in Luke 15 of the prodigal son. People who live that way will end up where? In the pig pen, all alone by themselves. So he tries to find it through these massive building projects. The Bible says it took him 14 years to build his own home. That's a long time. It took him 7 years to build the temple. He's got something to do every day that he likes to do. Build. And in fact, he beautifies Jerusalem. It's amazing. He has these pools all over the city that he builds. He has his own musicians so he can have his concert anytime he wants to. Doesn't have to go to one, just brings it all to him to the palace. He says in verse 10, I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all of my work. And this is the reward for my labor. What is it? Jerusalem's a better place. It's been beautified. But when I surveyed all my hands, all that I had done, all I toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. He's not saying don't build. He's saying you can spend hours and days and weeks and months and years trying to find happiness and peace and joy. But at the end of the day, when it's all said and done, you still got to deal with yourself and your relationship with your God. That's what he's saying. So, sadly, verse 17, he said, I hated life, because that the work that was done under the sun was grievous to me. All of it's meaningless, a chasing after the wind. I hated all the things I toiled for under the sun. Isn't that awful? Because I must leave them to the one who comes after me. Did you get that? It's still about him. And who knows whether that's that man that's going to inherit all he's worked for, who knows whether he will be a wise or a fool man. Yet he will have control over all the work which I've poured my effort in and skill in under the sun. This too is meaningless. So my heart began to despair over all my toilsome labor under the sun. And he goes on, this too is meaningless. The key phrase there, under the sun. Why didn't all of this work and all of these pursuits bring him what he was looking for? Here's the answer. He's working for himself, and it's all temporal under the sun. But when you live from an eternal perspective, with God's hand on your life, trusting, as we've already said, with the Lord with all of your heart, and leaning not on your own understanding, when you acknowledge God in every aspect of your life, when you get up in the morning, when you go to work, wherever it is, when you're involved in good, healthy, wholesome activities, when you're with your friends, if you acknowledge them as blessings from God with God's hands in it, then what? You'll start to find it. Solomon's going to mention just eating, something as simple as eating. And guess what he'll say? It is meaningless if you are just eating. But if you pause and you acknowledge that God's the source of every good and perfect thing that you get to put in your mouth, or you have the privilege to drive through and get or cook in front of you, and that here's an experience to be with family and friends as we eat, if you acknowledge God, what will happen? It'll start filling you up. That's the difference. That's the difference. So here's what he's learned from his search. Anything done apart from God is chasing after the wind. That's the end of chapter 2. And that brings us then to chapter 3. And I'll summarize it to the end of the book this way. Here's what he's learned from his search. He's learned that there's a time for everything. That's chapter 3. And I hope you'll mark verse 11 in your Bibles. He's learned that God has made everything beautiful in His time. Ray Stevens sang that song, Everything's Beautiful in Its Own Way. Even something as simple as a starry night or a snow-covered winter's day. God has made everything beautiful in its time. And thirdly, he learned from his search that God has also set eternity in the hearts of men. That means that we will never be completely satisfied with any earthly pursuit. Because we were created in the image of God, and therefore there is a deep longing deep inside every single one of us that can only be satisfied spiritually. Did you get that? Some people are aware of that, some people are not. Some people intellectually know it, but they won't live by faith. But that's the truth. So Solomon tells his audience, we can't fathom what God has done from the beginning to the end. And he says, I know, in verse 12, there's really nothing better than for men to be happy and do good. He said, that's the gift from God that God really wants us all to find. And so he looks for the next 2 chapters around at the people around him in the assembly, and guess what he sees? He sees that they're hurting and grieving people all around, plenty of people to serve. But listen closely, just acknowledging that fact that there are people around you who are hurting doesn't help anybody if you don't serve them and help them and put an arm around them and minister to them. So his challenge is when you see someone that way to put your faith into action. And so the question then, we'll close with this. If the question that he's been searching for is this, is there anything that will fill my life up and fill my every longing and bring me peace, contentment, joy, regardless of what's happening in the world around me? What's the answer that he's found? The answer is yes, there is. There is a secret. And it's found at the end of the book in 2 phrases. It's found in chapter 11, in the first part of it, when he says this, the secret is to live generously and be a generous giver to meet the needs of those around you. And secondly, that's the lead-in then to reminding the young people to learn it early. That's chapter 12. To learn that principle early. And then he says, let me tell you something. Here's the conclusion of everything, of all of it. Ecclesiastes 12:13 and 14. It's fearing God and keeping his commandments, for this is the whole. English translators have added the word duty. This is the whole of man. For God's going to bring into judgment every deed, whether they're good or bad. Solomon says here, if you want to know the secret to being a whole person, here it is. It's what? It's having that complete trust in God and having that relationship with God and keeping his commands as you walk humbly with him each day. As you look for ways to be generous and willing to share with others who are in need and hurting. Giving God the glory for the opportunity of how you've been blessed to help someone today. That's the key. And so I ask this morning, where's your life? Is this how you're living it? It's pretty heavy stuff, but he's let us in on the secret. And so we say this morning, if you need God in your life, if we can help you understand more about his way, his will, his word, and what he wants for us, so that you can indeed, as we just sang, Rise from those waters deep to the saving arms of God and sing salvation's song, Jesus Christ has set you free. We encourage you to do it because Solomon's in the lineage of Jesus, and this lesson is pointing the way to Jesus. And we're going to ask now that you make a resolve, if you need to, not to be charmed by anything in this world, but let Him fill your every longing. If you need Him, would you come? As together we stand and sing.